So welcome everyone. It is 8 o'clock Eastern time here, and I am Nick Wagner Sr. And this is another episode of the Full Potential Live Show. And as all of you know, we do this every Sunday night, and we stream this live on LinkedIn and YouTube. And then I will go ahead and turn this into the Full Potential podcast and share this on all the major podcast platforms that you probably like, including Apple, Google, Spotify, etc. So you'll be able to find this either in video or audio form, depending on however you'd like to watch. So tonight, thrilled to have Rahkim Sabree with me. So he is our guest for the evening. And I actually met Rahkim at the TEDx Hartford event in 2019. So just in the fall last year, he was one of the I think 8 or 9 speakers I think I remember at the TEDx event. And fantastic talk, which we'll get into tonight. I went up to Rahkim afterwards as I volunteered there, and I asked him if he'd be on the show, and here we are. So it is March, and he's made time. So Rahkim, thank you for joining the show tonight.
Absolutely, thanks for having me.
Well, I'm really excited because I think and as we were talking about why I wanted him on the show and what we were going to talk about, I do this show because everyone's career story is so unique and different, right? No two people have the same career story, and I've interviewed all sorts of people on here. Entrepreneurs, people in the corporate world, people in the nonprofit world, military folks, you name it. I've interviewed them. And what I've found is every time I interview anyone, I always learn something, and then my guests learn something. So that's what I really love. So I love starting off the conversation and to let you introduce yourself real quick. So if you were at a conference, Rahkim, and you met someone for the first time, and they were like, give me the 2-minute elevator pitch on who you are, what would you say? Like, how would you introduce yourself to someone you met for the first time?
I'd probably lead with the fact that I'm a hybrid entrepreneur. I think, that really kind of like catches people's attention, rings bells, because you don't hear that so much. And so, of course, they want to know more. And what that means essentially is that I have a traditional 9-to-5, but I also embrace entrepreneurship in the time that I'm not working. And so it gives me the opportunity to kind of straddle both worlds, really 3 worlds, if you include the nonprofit world, which is where some of my focus goes. And then, I think most times when I introduce myself that way, that people generally become more interested and start asking more questions. But I like to start there because, and we kind of talked about this offline, most people don't believe that it's possible or that it's probable or practical to split your time in that way. And it's not easy. It's certainly difficult, but definitely possible.
Yeah, no. And I think, and we'll dive into the nonprofit that you started and some of your entrepreneurial work as well as your 9-to-5 and what you do on a day-to-day basis. But I think what people will learn as they hear from you is that if you have a passion for something, it's easier to figure out how to maybe do more things like that or make more time because it's something that you really care about. So and one thing I want to make sure we highlight is, Rahkim has his own website. It's his name, rahkimsabree.com. We will make sure we link to your website, Rahkim, in all of the show details on both LinkedIn, YouTube, and the podcast. So people want to check you out, they can get in touch with you. And you're on social media, you're on LinkedIn, you're on Instagram, you're on Twitter, you're all over the place. So people can get in touch with you, find your book, learn more about the nonprofit if they want to get in touch with you after the show. So why don't we start with this? So in your traditional 9-to-5 job, right? So you kind of talked about it. You have your 9-to-5, you have your entrepreneurial work, and then you have your nonprofit, which I actually think is also entrepreneurial. It's just different from maybe the speaking and the books you do. All of this is centered around finances and financial literacy and understanding money, right? And this whole concept of how to be good with your money. So I'd like to kind of understand, like, where did that passion come from, right? And I asked that because I think money is something that obviously we all deal with, right? We all have to figure out how to make it, how to spend it, maybe not spend too much of it. But I think for a lot of people, it's a source of anxiety. I also think that it also ties back to, the anxiety also stems back to, there's a lot of math involved with money, and a lot of people don't necessarily like math. So how did you end up being so passionate about this specific topic? And if you could kind of share a little bit about that journey and how it ended up as financial literacy being something you were so passionate about.
Sure. So it really started at home. I grew up poor. I talk about it all the time. I can't say that I realized that I was poor, or certainly not as poor as I was, because I didn't really want for anything. I mean, we definitely had food, we definitely had clothes, just kind of the conditions of that environment. And so
let me pause you for a second. Did you know growing up that you were maybe, had less things or less opportunities than other people, or, that you were living differently? How did you know that? How did you figure that out?
It was a mixture of two different environments. I think when I started a majority of my elementary school learning, I was in a district in a city that was very diverse. And so we saw the spectrum there, right? Where people, their parents were volunteering to be the chaperones on the trips. They were, giving them the money to, do what they need to do. They had the newest video game or the newest outfit. Like everybody was pretty much kept up with the Joneses. And then probably midway or towards the end of my elementary school career, I moved into a new district because our physical location in terms of our residents changed. And so within that district, it was a lot less diverse, more on the urban minority side. So everybody was in the same boat. I mean, there were definitely variations there in terms of what people had and how parents chose to allocate funds for their children. But for the most part, everybody was just kind of living the same life and living the same mentality. So I think when I became conscious of money, particularly in the household and particularly stacked up against other people, it was just kind of like, this is status quo. I only knew the pain points of poverty through certain situations occurring, like, if we see an eviction notice, or our hot water goes out, or our electric bill is not paid, or even in not being able to participate in certain conversations, right? So, somebody might have a conversation about something they saw on cable television, and I didn't have cable, so I'm like, well, I can't participate in this discussion. But certainly, when you talk about opportunities, I mean, I've seen kids go to certain camps aligned to their interests, whether it be athletic, whether it be academic, whether it be from a music perspective, and realize that I didn't have those same opportunities to be coached or get that additional training because there was a price associated with it. And it didn't bother me so much because I was just like, all right, well, hang out with the other kids who aren't doing those things. And so I won't say that it was a deterrent. It was just kind of like, this is the reality. And so we fast forward to the future, right? And where I'm extremely passionate about financial education, I think a lot of that comes from a selfish desire to not be poor, but then also a very selfless desire in that I've worked in financial services for close to 10 years now, and I've gained a lot of knowledge by osmosis just working in the industry, but also knowledge that I've sought out, whether it be through seminars or workshops, independent reading, podcasts, videos. And so I don't realize often what it is that I know until I'm having a conversation and I realize that the person I'm talking to can't relate to what I'm talking about. And so as that part of my journey started to shape and shift, I realized I had a sort of obligation to share with people who maybe not as fortunate as I am in terms of the knowledge that I have around the money management. And that's kind of where it's landed me today. That's, like you said, the driving force behind a lot of the different initiatives that I work on, whether it be within the 9 to 5 or, every other hour, focusing on that education piece, especially because it's so limited in what is considered, I guess, popular culture.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you were growing up, my guess is that you did not have this. You probably didn't even realize, right? Like when you were little Rahkim in elementary school, you probably didn't think to yourself you wanted to be in the financial services industry.
Oh yeah,
would be my guess, right? So what was the first job that you wanted to be, like, that you remember being as a little kid? Like, what did you want to do when you grew up?
I wanted to be an architect when I was around 5 or 6.
I shared a similar passion with the whole. You play with Legos and all of a sudden you think you can make buildings or something like
Right,
that. I
right.
don't know. Maybe that's what it was. But so at what point? Because it sounds like obviously your childhood and how you grew up shaped the industry that you got into and what you're doing today. At what point did you realize that this whole financial education piece and the financial piece all tied together and was something that you want to do more of when you were older, right? Did your I wanted to ask you, was your first job did your first job have anything to do with education or the financial education you talk about today, or was it kind of an evolution through through the years?
It was definitely an evolution. In fact, I don't think that I started moving in that direction until I was already moving in that direction. So I was already working in finance and banking. I had already participated in different seminars. I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, which really got me started. And I was just like, you know what, like I can build on this. And I'm in a good place to build on it because I'm viewed as an authority within this space, right? People are coming to me. I'm doing servicing on their accounts. I'm selling products. I'm talking about the banking world. People are looking for my expertise. And so, you don't want to go out and not be knowledgeable about what you're talking about. And so there was a lot of independent studying on back end to understand the products that I was essentially selling to people, but also in that those customers, a mixture of them, were educated, right? So they're coming back and they're saying, well, I'm not going to participate in this service or take up this product because I know better. And so how do you come back from that at 21, 22 years old and you're talking to, somebody in their 50s or 60s about how they manage their money? And so it kind of just became like, all right, like I need to arm myself. I don't want to be in a situation where I look stupid. And and then I just kind of realized like I had a passion around it. I've always been someone to share knowledge. I've always had a emphasis placed on education from my parents, my grandparents, whoever I viewed as immediate leadership. And to answer your question too about like, some of the first jobs I worked, my very, very first job on books that I pay taxes for is was a part of a nonprofit. So it's going out and being educated on things that impact school age teenagers, sex education, education, domestic violence and abuse, and then going out and speaking to that demographic with with the backing of the organization. And so that was my first like real paycheck. I don't often go that far back when I talk about my career journey because I consider my career starting as my first real job, right? Where you get the benefits and the 401k and all of that. But, when I think about it in hindsight now, especially with my involvement in the nonprofit space, that definitely, I think, had an impact, whether it was conscious or subconscious.
Yeah, and you were like you said, you were teaching at a really early age. Teaching your peers about all these different topics you just mentioned. So yeah, I mean, it definitely seems like that helped mold a little bit about who you are today. So I want to ask a question because education, it sounds like, was a huge part of your upbringing, right? And you mentioned your parents and your grandparents, and I think that's a very common thing that um, you get pushed by the people that you live with, right? Or they're a part of your world.
Definitely.
The expectation of you to go to college, was that like Rahkim, you're going to college and there's no negotiation on this, or was that up for discussion when you were going through high school? Because I always find that to be a really pivotal point in people's lives.
Um, it was not. It was not a mandate. It was so the way my family talked about education was more so from the process of being educated than what the paper credential kind of insinuates, right? So, education was being able to travel and understand different cultures and languages and customs, or being able to pick up a book and understand what happened in history, or how to cross reference something that is stated as fact in this source, but something that is stated as, alternative fact, right, in another source. And so education was self-motivating for me. if I wanted to learn something, then I would go out and try to learn it, rather than being in an environment where you're told, well, you have to read these books and you have to study this curriculum and you have to demonstrate proficiency in this area in order to move forward. And so I don't want to say that I was lucky in that environment, but it certainly wasn't difficult for me to kind of keep up with what the standards and expectations of the public school system were. But I was just very disinterested. I did not like doing homework. I did not like completing assignments. I did not like reading any of the assigned books, but I did show an interest in learning about the things that I wanted to learn.
I don't think that's uncommon, right? I think you see that with students all the time, right? You'll have educators that'll be struggling with getting a student to do something, and then they'll find that one thing that student really interests that student, and it's like a light switch goes on, and they're like a different kid. So I think that's pretty common. So according to your LinkedIn, you did end up going to college.
Yep.
Why did you ultimately end up going? What did you go for? And do you think that helped you get your first job in the financial services industry?
Okay.
So that was a lot of questions wrapped into one. Sorry.
So I'll answer them as I remember them. I went to college because I was told that that's what I should do. Growing up, I did have interest in psychiatry. I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to be a doctor of psychology. And I knew that the only way to acquire that credential was to go through medical school. So I, again, became, self-interested in going to school to study medicine. But my parents didn't really understand how to guide me in that process because it wasn't a process necessarily that they had been through. And same with my grandparents. So I was really dependent on public education to let me know or point me in the directions of, okay, well, you need to apply for this scholarship. You need to apply to this school. These are the things that you need to evaluate. These are the test scores that you need to have. And I talk about this a lot in the financial space because one of the, I would say in hindsight, bad pieces of advice that I received was, not to worry about the student loan, right? Everybody takes out student loans was what was told to me. And so in making my decision around where I went to school, there was this kind of like ambivalence around what the cost was because everybody takes out student loans. And I think if I knew then what I know now, I probably would have taken a different path. In fact, I definitely would have taken a different path, but I am grateful for the path that I did take. As far as getting a job in financial services, I can't say that my education played a role outside of my ability to critical think and articulate myself. And so I think, non-traditional education played a huge role in that. And certainly the experience that I had built up to that point, whether it be cash handling or customer service. But my growth in the industry was really just kind of propelled based off of, very quick accumulation of skill set that I can then demonstrate, over and over through different leadership in this ambition, right, to keep moving forward. And so I've had a very quick rise, I think, relative to different people, just because I've had a very intentional direction about where I wanted to be and how fast I wanted to get there.
Yeah, and from the banking world, you started basically, it looks like, according to LinkedIn, you started as, entry level, at a bank, and now I think you're like some sort of vice president, if I read it correctly. So, in a pretty quick amount of time, right? So what? And it's been a couple of different companies, that you've made this transition. But my question for you is, because to your point, right? I mean, you didn't go to school for finance. It's not like you learned all this in school. How did you learn everything so quickly? And do you think? Because I think a lot of people look at a career path like yours, and you're like, oh, you just went up, right? It's just you just kept going up, which eventually that's going to stop, right? You can't do that forever. Right. But what do you think what do you think enabled you to have that I don't want to say meteoric rise, right? But like this really quick path upwards from entry level banking associate to, vice president. How does that happen? Like what was it? Was it you were at the right place at the right time? Plus you work really hard. Plus you kept learning. Like what do you think? What do you think was the secret sauce?
I definitely do think that it was a combination. I think a lot of it was relationship building, right? So understanding who the major players are and how do you get them on your side? How do you get them invested in your growth? And what is the exchange, right? What are they getting out of it? And I don't know that I was able to articulate it in words that way back then. But looking back on my career, all of my growth was based off of somebody believing in me and putting me in a situation where I can demonstrate my ambition and my drive to succeed. And then I think a part of it too was, just having the audacity to ask, right? I think there's a lot of people who could be qualified to do a greater span of responsibility than they are currently in, or maybe not qualified, but definitely capable of gaining the competencies in a relatively quick manner, but are afraid to ask. And
Right.
so in my entire working career, spanning even outside of banking, right, I've always had this desire to climb, to do better, to do more, to make more money. And so in that, I knew what the end game was. And I'm just like, all right, who do I point to move forward? And I remember being under 21, working in a supermarket. Uh, there was this high level operations manager who was in our new hire class, and she impressed me. I was just like, I need to know who this lady is. And at the end of the class, at 20 years old, I walked up to her and I said, I want to be a manager in 6 months. And I had no experience, right? And I'm looking at myself in hindsight, like, this kid, right? He's coming out here and he's making these demands. But the way that she looked at me after hearing that and the advice that she gave me, I felt at the time was kind of dismissive. But I could tell that it wasn't dismissive in that she was telling me what it is that she thought I needed to hear. It was basic advice, right? You show up to work every day. You make sure that people know who you are. You make sure that you get credit for the work that you do. And if you work really hard, you'll climb. Like that's the base formula. But she didn't tell me at 20 years old, listen, kid, like you have no experience. You're not going to be a manager in 6 months. And so I think that was equally important for her as a leader to not rain on my parade, but to still give me some kind of glimmer of hope. And I held on to that. And I
Yeah.
did. Came in, I worked as much as I could on schedule. And if they ever needed additional help, I stayed late. If they needed somebody to come in on, off hours, I came in and I made sure people knew who I was. And I've maintained that throughout my career.
So do you think, because you mentioned earlier how you thought your age might have played into some, part of like how you had to operate at your role. Do you think your age was looked at as a negative as you made these transitions through the financial services industry? Because you're a relatively young guy, right? And you had, as you kind of went through these roles over the past, I say 9 years. I mean, you were relatively young. So how did you kind of get past that? Like, hey, aren't you only 24 or 25? Why do you think we should put you in this role?
That's a really good question. I've never been asked that before. So in the beginning, I didn't advertise my age. In fact, I remember a particular role that I had. I inflated my age. I added a year or two because I was supervising. This is the first time that I'm supervising people who I'm either at the same level as in terms
Yeah.
of age or younger than. So I'm like, are they going to respect me? And that was kind of like my first taste of how do you influence without authority or with authority, but still having that bias, that age bias. In terms of leadership, though, and the leadership that's taking chances on me, I don't think my age has ever played a factor. Certainly, I've never gotten that impression. But when you're customer facing, right? Like I was, especially in a banking environment, and my last position in a customer facing environment, I was managing I was managing a team. I was managing a banking center. And so for me to be in a very mass affluent location where, people have tons of money, right? And they, have this, I was probably between the ages, when I started supervising, between the ages of maybe 23 and 27. Like, how do you tell me no, right? This young guy, how do you tell me no that I can't have this or that you're not going to make this
Right.
situation? And so there was definitely, I think, an attempt to bully there, but I had strong support and I had strong, I think, reinforcement in terms of, Rahkim, if you make this decision as a leader, stand by it. And so I carry that with me as well. Now I'm not customer facing, but the same kind of attitude still exists, right? Where I will tell people what my age is, and I take pride in being one of the younger, if not the youngest, leaders at the table when I'm at the table. But I think a lot of people, that goes out of the window once they hear me talk, because I'm coming in with facts. I'm coming in as a subject matter expert. I'm coming in confident and knowledgeable. And if I don't know the answer, then I won't share the answer. I'll just, I'll let them know. Good question. I'll follow up with you.
Yeah. No, I just think it's interesting because I think, and as I've done a lot of these interviews, I think age has definitely played a part in some people not getting opportunities in their careers. So good for you, and it not holding you back. I think that's great. I want to pivot a little bit, because you mentioned that leadership has really supported you throughout your time, in the banking industry. Did you have like a specific assigned mentor throughout these past 8 or 9 years? Did you build mentor relationships on your own, more informally? Like, how did you share with my audience the approach you took with that?
Definitely self-started. Nobody offered mentorship to me. I should take that back. I have mentorship that's been offered to me very recently in my career, like in this current role.
Okay.
But previously to that, I sought out the mentorship. So I identified, a key player, somebody who made the decisions, and I said, listen, like, this is where I want to be. Like I said, always ambitious, right? Stating what my intent is. This is where I want to go. Give me the test. And if I'm not passing the test, then explain to me what is it I need to do to pass the test. And so it wasn't a guessing game for me. It was very black and white. It was, you need to hit these 3 milestones in order for me to consider you for promotion. And not only consider you, but stand behind that decision. And so in building those relationships over the course of time, depending on the company that I work for and definitely the role that I was in, these people changed and their management or leadership styles changed with it. And so I had to be somewhat of a chameleon, right? And just understand, well, what motivates this manager to view, somebody as successful or not successful? And what do they get out of mentoring or sharing what it is that they've experienced? And do they view my success as their success? And I'm learning this as I'm moving along. So of course, like I said, I can't at the time articulate what is it I'm articulating now, but in hindsight, it was very methodic. These days, I do have a mentor, and I was approached. Because I had my first book was on mentoring. So of course, I talk about the passion that I have for mentoring. And one of my favorite books ever, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, talks about that exchange, right? The people exchange. And so when I incorporated those principles into just my daily operating, right, at work and outside of work and dealing with people, you realize that people are more open to sharing based off of how you interact with them, what value you provide, and certainly what value they can give you back.
Yeah, no, I think most people I've talked to, if they haven't been assigned a formal mentor, they've sought it out like you have. And I think it's so critical to having a successful career, because while we think we know everything when we're young, we really don't. Right? and I don't know everything now, and I'm not exactly young anymore. So I just think it's so critical to have those people that you can go to in your life and ask for help. So let's move to the nonprofit part of what you do. So we talked about your day job and your success there. A couple of years ago, you started a nonprofit, to kind of continue, not really continue, but to really, I think, probably maybe it'll be more formalize some of the work you're doing around financial education is maybe the best way to say it. So can you share with the audience, like, why did you start the nonprofit? What is it? And, how do you see it playing into your broader, your broader mission as a human of empowering people?
Sure. So the nonprofit was actually not my idea, right? My co-founder, he was the visionary behind putting it together. He worked in the nonprofit space his entire career. And a good friend of mine, before we started the nonprofit, and we're just kind of talking one day about entrepreneurship is a passion that we share, and financial education is a passion that everybody can identify as being something that drives me. And homelessness was an issue that he really wanted to address. And I'm like, homelessness? Like, why homelessness? And I tell this story all the time. I grew up in New York. And so, walking around New York, you kind of become desensitized, right? Because it's just everywhere. And so when I would see somebody standing on the corner asking for money, I would have one of two reactions. One would be, this person is potentially, trying to scam you, right? They're somebody undercover just trying to make money off of other people's good faith. Or two, this person is actually homeless. They need help. But if I give the money, they're going to go take the money and they're going to use it on drugs or alcohol, right? And it's terrible, terrible stigmas that I had. But it's just that becomes what the thought process is. And so I learned not to make eye contact. Somebody standing on a corner, like, just don't look at them, because then you won't feel obligated to give. And, fast forward, because I had to resensitize myself to what is homelessness and what does the spectrum of homelessness look like. And that it's not just impacting, this typecast image of, your traditional bum. And I use that with air quotes because to me, like, it's become a bad word, but it was a word that we threw around all the time growing up. And it includes a much wider spectrum of children, of college age children, of veterans, of working people, because you can be a working person and still be homeless. And so as you dig deeper and, you uncover more things, you find out that there are more things to uncover, and understanding, what prompts somebody into homelessness. And how close is the average American to being homeless, right? If you miss 2 paychecks and you have a mortgage that you can barely afford and a car note and, your insurance payment and, student loan debt and regular credit card debt, like at some point, something's going to have to give. And slowly you'll see your world falling apart if you're not prepared or aware of best practices around financial education. And then that spiral starts a chain reaction, right? Sometimes, a lot of times, homeless individuals become addicted to drugs or abuse drugs and alcohol as a way to cope with their current situation. So it's not that they started that way; it's that's how they're managing their circumstances. And so really I became mission driven to educate and talk about the stigma associated with people who are impacted by homelessness, but also kind of reinvigorated to share what is that I've learned about financial education as one of the key components or key programs to our organization. And then my partner, he brings in education around health and wellness, because he's been in an advocacy field with, people who are impacted by mental disabilities, or, the elderly population, or people with acquired brain injuries. And how do you advocate for those individuals, or how do they advocate for themselves? A lot of times they don't. And you have a population of homeless individuals who are impacted by those things. And then also, how do you help people understand what are the the motions that you have to go through, or the qualifications that you have to have in order to go get a job? If you don't understand, what etiquette looks like in terms of how you should show up dressed, or what you should say, or how to look for a job, or how to create a resume, then now you're fighting a losing battle, because nobody's going to hire you because they're like, well, you don't know how to write a resume, you're not qualified. And so, that's another program of ours, helping people become independent in their job preparedness. We call it employment development. And so as we grow and we learn and we experience, we expand, right? And so now we're including entrepreneurship in that. And that, okay, maybe you want to go work for yourself. Well, these are the structures that have to exist in order for you to create a business plan and have an income. And maybe you need to do the work that you don't like doing in order to fund your passion until your passion is generating its own income. And so as we expand, there's so much more to tackle. And the nonprofit world as it relates to homelessness is so small and interconnected because it's a national issue. That a lot of times you're running in the same circles with people, and we realize very quickly, like you said, we're only 2 years old this year, that the competition for resources, like funding, is so high, specific to homelessness, that we have to pivot in our strategy. And so now our approach is addressing homelessness, not from a head-on perspective solely, but from a preventative perspective. And that if we can focus on the education piece, we can stop it at its source and not have to worry about the cleanup of this leap.
So prevent people from even becoming homeless.
Absolutely.
So for my listeners, and again, we'll link to Rahkim's, well, his own personal website, but it's called An Extended Hand Inc. is the actual nonprofit. And there's a link on your website as well if you want to get involved and help volunteer. And and again, I think you're 100% right. If you can prevent people from becoming homeless, that's a great step into helping fight the homelessness battle, right? Because you have less people homeless to begin with. And a big part of that is the financial education piece that you talk about, and how do you prevent people from mishandling their money and possibly getting into that situation to begin with. So I love that. And again, I think it's great that you are giving back and helping people, now that you feel that you've been successful and that you have the ability to, live the life you've wanted to live, you're giving back to those that aren't as fortunate. So I really appreciate that. And thank you for that. So the last thing you mentioned, so, you have your 9 to 5, you have the nonprofit, and then you have the entrepreneurship piece, which is, you have 2 books, you're a speaker, you've done a TEDx talk. Is it also, again, the books tied to financial education, the TED talk tied to financial education. How do you, I guess my first question is, how do you have time to be an author and write 2 books and do speaking? And what is your real goal around the content you're creating and what you're doing?
I like the time question. I get that a lot. And my answer is usually pretty much the same. We all have the same 24 hours in a day, give or take, right? Because our experiences vary, right? If I had a family and children, I would have to dedicate time towards that. Because I'm career driven, I can kind of focus on my career and I can focus on where I would like to see my entrepreneurial endeavors go. But same thing, right? 24 hours in a day. And so how you allocate your time or reallocate your time is important. So one of the things I like to talk about is I don't watch television. And so I grew up, my grandfather used to refer to television as the idiot box. And
that's funny.
I didn't understand what that meant. I thought just like an old person like saying when he was saying it to us. But in hindsight, like I realized like you can sit in front of the television and just lose yourself for hours. And I'm not immune to it, right? There's certain shows that I'll watch, but I don't have cable. And I remember, growing up in the 90s, there was like a cutoff. The TV, like programming would stop and then you get all the infomercials. And now we live in an age where the TV doesn't just exist on the television. The programming is going on and on and on and on consistently. You have YouTube and all of the other streaming, Hulu, Netflix, Apple TV. I mean, the list keeps growing. And so there's always time for you to be plugged in. And, for the Gen Z population who grew up with the internet already established, they don't know anything else. And so precious hours, being thrown away because you're trying to catch up on, name popular television TV series. Yeah. Instead of working on building something that, maybe is going to make a difference in your future. And so I'm certainly not saying that, I'm all work and no play, but I find ways to work in the time that I'm playing. And I find ways to work in the time that I just have free. And now it's gotten to a point where I can't imagine anything different. I was telling a friend recently over the course of this weekend, I said, even when I tell myself that I need a break, I'll go in to watch television and I find my selection gravitating towards documentaries,
Yeah.
something educational rather than just something mind numbing. And so I think that's just, that's years of consistency and discipline around, well, what value is being exchanged here, right? Am I learning something or am I just sitting here wasting time? And then the second part to your question, I think was how you said, how do I have time to do it? And what is
Yeah.
my
What
vision for like moving
yeah,
forward?
exactly. What do you want to take this?
Uh, I want to ride it all the way through. I don't have really too many expectations. I certainly want to grow my platform. I want to be recognized as a thought leader in the space, personal finance in particular. And I think the best way to do that is to be everywhere. I recently, and when I mean recently, I want to say probably January, finished a book by Grant Cardone called The 10X Rule.
Mhm.
And Grant Cardone in the book talks about, the difference between being average and mediocre and being great is, taking massive action. And he talks about, well, how do you do that? You be everywhere. You get to a point where people, they just can't not see you. And so I really like that, especially with how easy it is in this day and age with social media, traditional media, and all of the different ways that people consume content, right? So like you said, I've done TED, right? So I have a presence on YouTube and Google. I have my own website where occasionally I blog. I have a presence on, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, where I'm providing value for free a lot of the time and talking about things that most people either don't know or had heard of, but they're not really clear on, and they're engaging. I have a book out there, so right, that's my credibility. Somebody's going to say, okay, this guy is an accomplished author. He wrote 2 books in 2 years. He did a TED talk. He's, if you search my name, like I'm ranking in Google because there's only one Rahkim Sabree, right? So I'm not competing with anybody.
You have a unique name. I will give you that. That is a good thing.
And just it's getting to that. I shouldn't say that it's getting to a point where I'm everywhere, but anywhere that people are looking, I'm trying to be. And so what that means for me is that I have to constantly be conscious of where are people looking, right? If I could get on television or on Netflix or Apple TV, like that would be like the epitome of success for me, because now it's just like I'm everywhere. People are going to come to me. I'm not having to seek them out. And the content is so relevant to today's day and age. When I opened up my TED Talk, I talk about how FINRA reports that 2/3 of Americans show low levels of financial literacy. That's a lot.
Yeah.
And because it's becoming, such a big thing in the media, right? In politics and education, there's legislation being passed that's, mandating financial education to be a part of, school curriculums, whether that be college or high school. It's like, oh, now is the time, right? You're not just talking the talk, you're walking the walk. And so you made a point earlier that that I wanted to elaborate on, that I don't necessarily consider myself as having attained the lifestyle that I want, right? I don't consider myself as being successful. That's me. That's me being hard on me, right? A lot of people looking at me and they're like, this guy has attained a level of success that most people don't. But for me, there's always that next level. And so I think the appeal to my message, especially from a financial education perspective, is that I'm not there yet, right? I'm not Grant Cardone. I'm not Robert Kiyosaki. I'm not Dave Ramsey or Susie Orman. I don't have millions sitting in the bank or invested in real estate or whatever, but I'm going through the motions and I'm bringing people on my journey with me. And so in bringing people on my journey with me, I think that establishes credibility because there's relatability there. It's not this guy's in his ivory tower preaching about what success looks like. He's actually doing it.
Well, I think giving free advice is huge, right? I think that helps. It shows that you care. You have a nonprofit that shows that you care. But I think the biggest thing is you're authentic, and you share your story about how you grew up with nothing, right? And you're very honest about that. And I think to your point, it just makes you more relatable. So people are more willing to, I think, listen to you and say, you know what, Rahkim does know what he's talking about. I mean, he's in finance and he gets this, and I should listen to, he gives good advice. So I always just find that interesting about how, how and why people do what they do, and how it kind of plays into their career. And, everything you're doing is all kind of tied together, even though it's three separate, distinct worlds, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely does.
So I like to do this sometimes. I like to do a lightning round where I ask you some questions, and then I expect you to come up with brilliant answers very quickly to share with my audience. So we'll throw a couple of questions at you and see what you say. Biggest accomplishment of your career so far?
I'm torn between the TED Talk and my second book.
Okay. And again, we'll make sure that your books are on your website, RahkimSabree.com. So if people want to check those out, they'll be able to go purchase those. And, because there's a lot that I think people are going to want to know about you, maybe look up more. So we'll make sure to link that. Biggest failure of your career?
I don't consider myself as having failed yet. I think, every opportunity has been a learning opportunity. And if I can make an analogy, in high school, I wrestled. And my high school wrestling coach, he would always say, don't abandon what you're doing, adjust, right? If this person moves this way and you're trying to do this, well, adjust, figure it out. And so I think the psychology of that stuck with me, in that, I've attempted things and I haven't seen the success that I thought that I was going to get out of it, but I learned from the attempt. And so in that process, I guess you can consider that failure, because what my desired end result wasn't achieved, but I learned something that put me in a position where I can speak to it with authority. And that's just been this progressive build over time.
Yeah, no, I think learning from setbacks and, opportunities like that it's so critical. So I love how you highlighted that. Most influential person in your short life so far?
That's torn. I'm torn between my grandfather,
Okay.
and a really good friend of mine, who I grew up with.
And why? And you can have two. I'm totally fine with that. Why? What did they do that helped influence you and inspire you so much? What did they bring to like kind of your world?
So as a child, my grandfather, he really helped me embrace this mentality that was not limiting, right? I don't have limiting beliefs about what I can accomplish.
That's why you go up to people within, like, when you start jobs and say, hey, I want to be a manager in 6 months. How do I make that happen? That's why you have that.
I believe, he's instilled that in me from a very young age, in that, not greatness is something to aspire for, but greatness is something that is internal, right? And it's my responsibility to bring it out. And so he created a framework around that for me. And I live and breathe that every day. As far as the friend that I mentioned, he came into my life at a time where, I was 15, getting ready to become 16. At that age, you think you know everything and nobody can tell you anything. And he really emphasized for me, like, being myself. He's like, just be you, just do you. And so at that point in my life, I wasn't a very confident person. I'm an introvert by nature. Nobody would know that unless I say it. But I think from some perspectives, people will consider him as having been a bad influence on my life, right? But he showed me balance. He showed me contrast. He showed me. He took me to my first party and got me started in the partying world. And I think that's important, because if you go to a party today, especially today, right, where we're in such a highly digital environment, there's music playing, and then there's everybody standing along the perimeter of this location, right, afraid to make the first move. And one of the lessons that I always remember that this friend brought to me was, he's like, you need to make the first move. Like, be the first person on a dance floor. It doesn't matter that you're nervous. Everybody else is nervous. Like, go out there and do that. And so for me, I was always sure of myself, but I wasn't sure of myself in comparison to other people. And so he taught me how to bring that, that surety and that confidence out, and to express that unapologetically. Are
you guys still friends today?
We're not. So he actually recently passed. So He recently passed.
I'm sorry to hear that, but it sounds like he definitely had some big impacts on your life.
Absolutely.
And it's just I think everyone can relate to the description of a party that you just shared and
Oh,
the awkwardness that comes with that at all different points in your life, right? It's just funny. I can see people listening to this and be like, yeah, I totally know what he's saying, right? So no, I'm sorry to hear about the loss of your friend, but it sounds like his memory lives on, right? So we'll tribute him tonight. So last question in the lightning round. The most common mistake, financial mistake Americans are making that you think can be avoided. What's your opinion there?
I think I'm torn on two again.
That's fine. Go for it.
So the one is abusing credit. So there's just not a solid understanding of how to use credit, right? And how to use credit effectively, because it can be a great tool. And so you have a camp that says, use credit, like use it. And then you have a camp that says, no, credit's a bad word, stay away from it. Don't get the credit card, like don't finance, do everything in cash.
Yeah.
And happy medium. There's definitely an effective way to manage credit. And I think people just need to become more educated around the process and what's on the other side of it, between interest rates and fees and penalties and how that impacts your credit report and your credit score. And then the second one, which I think probably is more significant, is that we don't understand this concept of paying ourselves first, right? We're very much in a consumer-based economy, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. But I think that when you're giving constantly, and you're not taking any of what it is that you make, that's how you stay running on that hamster wheel. And so I think that we become very passive investors, because we're taught, once we get that corporate job that comes with the benefit package and the 401k, like, yeah, you allocate money towards your 401k and it's on autopilot. But we're not taking a strong interest in being really introspective about where our money is going, whether that be from a budgeting perspective or a saving perspective or an investing perspective. We're not asking questions. We're accepting what is considered status quo. And a lot of times what is considered status quo keeps you status quo.
Yeah.
And you're not gonna achieve anything but what is considered status quo if you're embracing those behaviors.
No, I think that makes sense. So I appreciate that. So thanks for answering those questions again. Thank you for making time tonight. I know how busy you are. So joining us on the show means a lot. So I always close with the same question for every guest. So you obviously, and I know you're very humble, so you're not going to say you're successful so far, but you've been very successful in your short career, and it's been, in your, again, very young career at this point. What is your advice to my listeners that's helped you reach your full potential, right? So what would you share with everyone that you think has been that one thing that's helped you be successful at this point so far in your life?
I would have to say the mindset, right? It starts in your mind, and getting rid of those limiting beliefs is, I think, the first step in the direction towards, having the audacity to ask for what it is that you feel like you deserve, or, taking that class or that course or going to that seminar, or, like I said, being the first person in the party to move, right? And I use the party as an analogy because that was what I was experiencing at that time in my life. But to reframe it for more career-driven folks, like, we go to these networking events all the time, and it's just a big corporate party. We're not dancing,
right?
But we're doing this social dance, right? You walk up to somebody, you ask for their business card, you give them your business card. There's, the 2-minute elevated pitch, and then it's like, okay, where does that go? And so we need to be more effective communicators and networkers too. But the first step to that, I hear so many people say, I'm not good at networking. Like, I hate networking events. And I do too. Like, I hate them, but I love them because I've had to learn how to work them. And being an introvert, like, those environments drain me. Like, getting up with people drains me. Talking, all of that. And I take time to recover afterwards. But while I'm there, like, I'm in the zone. And I'm usually, like, I'm going out there and I'm talking to people and asking them about themselves and sharing about me. And so I think, the person that doesn't pull the trigger first is a person that's standing there and missing the opportunity. But again, that goes back to that limiting belief. Like, well, I'm not good enough to talk to this person. No, like, I woke up to a CEO and I woke up to a janitor and I'm like, hey, my name is Rahkim. This is what I do. And
And we can thank your grandfather for this principle who taught you, who you shared with tonight. So, so we thank Rahkim's grandfather for that, because I love that, and I think it all goes back to self-confidence. Is really what it is, And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people lack that self-confidence for whatever reason. So I think that's a great advice. So again, thank you for making time. It's RahkimSabree.com. We'll make sure we share that in our show notes in the description. And again, appreciate you joining us, talking about your career, talking about your passion for financial education, the nonprofit, all the work you're doing with the books and the TED Talk. And I wish you continued success, and thanks for all the work you're doing to help everyone out.
Thank you, and I wish you the same success.
Thank you, sir. Have a fantastic evening.
You too.